Good morning, students. As we present our case on human trafficking today, I'm sure you are all familiar with human trafficking, but you may not be familiar with us. I'm Jake McConnell, and I will be presenting the overview and solutions of human trafficking. My colleague Fernando, if you want to explain what you will present on today.
We're going to be talking about sex and child trafficking, a specific area of human trafficking.
And then Karim, Barakat, what will you be presenting?
And I'll be discussing specific case studies that have taken place in regard to human trafficking.
All right, very interesting. Now we'll be starting presentation. So, an overview of human trafficking. So, Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines human trafficking as the illegal movement of people, typically for the purposes of forced labor or commercial sexual exploitation. So we've all heard what human trafficking means. We all can kind of attribute it to like modern day slavery if we were asked to give like a comparison to it. But not all of us know the extent of human trafficking and how prevalent it is today. You may think that it only goes out in like really poor regions of the world, but actually contrary, it happens in the U.S. a lot. As Karim has a case in Pittsburgh. Is that right, of human trafficking? It happens all around us. I'm from the Bay Area, and human trafficking is very prevalent in San Francisco as well. And here's a short video explaining human trafficking to you and how it can happen, even though, even in relatively like protected areas. Just enjoy. trafficking can happen in the United States, it can happen anywhere, and that just shows you how kind of prevalent human trafficking actually is. It just starts with like an offer, a job offer, like a potential better life, and then the people will buy into it, and then they'll be stuck somewhere. Their phone, their identification will be stolen, and they'll have no way out. Oftentimes, they'll never be able to contact their families again, and then they're just lost. They're just statistics after that. Here's a continuation of human trafficking. So the causes for human trafficking. This is the causes for why people go into the trafficking. It's usually because of poverty, abusive relationships, and abuse of power. So for poverty, there's a lot more human trafficking in situations where there's less money. So in some parts of like Southeast Asia, where there's not a lot of money, some families will give their sons and daughters to specific organizations and people for money in hopes of also having their children have a better life, but that's not the case. They'll take the money, and then organizations will lie. They say that they'll give better jobs to the kids that they take, but they actually traffic them instead. They'll either be working like sex jobs or hard labor jobs, and they're never found again usually. Abusive relationships. Actually, Fernando is going to talk about this later, but 1 in 3 kids that run away end up trafficked. 1 in 3, so that's a pretty big number when you consider it. When kids run away from home, like out of an abusive relationship, they typically go to somebody, and they're an easy target for trafficking predators. Also, abusive power in places in certain countries, when there's abusive dictatorships, trafficking can be more prevalent, as well as the dictators will request that the kids do work for them, or they have more free reign to take children away. And they can also trick parents into like thinking that they'll give them a civil service job, but that's not the case. That happens in some other parts of the South. Then the effects of the human trafficking is, of course, the coercion, slavery. You'll never be able to see your parents again, your friends again. Your communication with the outside world will be limited. You won't make good wages. You won't have health care. You're subject to a lot more disease, especially in the sex industry, and also in labor too. You don't have workers' compensation. It's just generally an awful situation. And who gets trafficked typically? You typically have younger people. Typically women get trafficked more, but also men get trafficked too, and that's something that we tend to overlook occasionally. So where? It occurs in all areas, contrary to popular belief. Like some people would only think it's large cities in other parts of the world, but that's not true. It happens everywhere. The FBI actually listed the San Francisco Bay Area as the top 10 most prevalent trafficking places in the United States. So it just happens. It happens everywhere, and we need to be more vigilant about it. It also happens in poor villages across the world and border cities. Who traffics? Who picks up these people? Who offers them jobs? Who takes away their life? Gangs, cartels, brothels. These are all expected. They're all illegal anyways. But then also you have corporations and governments that also do it, which is a lot more surprising. Like corporations who need low-wage workers will actually occasionally under the table. They won't be directly responsible for it, but they will have trafficked workers occasionally through other companies so that they don't have to take direct responsibility for it, but their products are going to be made occasionally by trafficked workers. And governments also could take these trafficked people, or could receive the traffic. Why do people traffic? I guess this is kind of an easy question. Money is why people traffic. In 2010, $31.6 billion was made in global trade alone through human trafficking, which is a lot more than like other industries music industry in the world made $6 billion last year. Trafficking made $31.6 billion. And cheaper labor and sex acts is also, it's illegal to get, or it's at least harder to find prostitutes sometimes for like brothels and stuff, or like super cheap labor, for hard labor jobs that you wouldn't have to pay workers' comp to, so they would also do that. But it all kind of revolves around money and the illegality of it. What is currently being done? I'm talking about solutions later. I'm just saying what's currently being done right now. So there's a lot of legislation in place to kind of help curb trafficking. To the extent that it works is kind of negotiable. But there's some UN legislation and the United Nations Global Initiative to fight human trafficking. That's a big one because the UN kind of dictates the world. But again, with the UN, the global police power only goes so far. I mean, it doesn't. It's not as effective as it should be, as it was written to be. In the U.S., you have the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, and you have all a series of the protection acts over the year. They have to be constantly revised because traffickers get smarter through the usage of the internet and other media platforms like that, tricking people with social media. Catfishing can also lead to trafficking. Then you have the Tariff Act of 1930 and CFTEA, which are World kind of trade agreements to kind of help limit like box-goods through trafficking. And you have the RICO Acts, which kind of help like curb and help place penalties on corporations that use like traffic peoples and goods made through trafficking. And then the Mann Act of 1910 was also to kind of protect against human trafficking and make it illegal. But even though it's illegal, it doesn't mean people still will follow those rules. And so better solutions need to be in place to help curb human trafficking in the world and help eventually like diminish it. Then on to Fernando Nunes, who will be talking about human trafficking, the sex and child trafficking aspects of it.
Okay, so I'm going to start off with a quote from someone that did experience this. So Kola, a sex trafficking survivor from Cambodia, says, "They forced me to sleep with as many as 50 customers a day. I had to give the pimp all my money. If I did not earn a set amount, they punished me by removing my clothes and beating me with a stick until I fainted, electrocuting me and cutting me." You see, this is a very serious problem now, and people that do survive were mistreated a lot of times. So what is sex and child trafficking? It's a form of modern slavery where they violate their rights. Any minor that is in commercial sex, it doesn't matter. Any form of child pornography is considered sex trafficking. A lot of times, what they do to trap people is that they get into relationships. They offer high-paid jobs, and they also promote future goals. They target specific people. For example, people that normally are in poverty, and those that are runaways as well. And they promise payments. So statistically, there were 3,598 cases in 2014 in U.S. alone. This is by Polaris. This doesn't account for the ones that they did not find, obviously. 1 in 6 runaways, people that run away from their houses, are likely to be in sex trafficking because they're vulnerable. And about 2 million children per year are involved only in sex trafficking. Females also make up 98% of the sex trafficking. So as you can see here, a pimp can make $150,000 to $200,000 each year, and he only has about 4 to 6 girls. This generates about $9.5 billion annually, and approximately 300,000 children are at risk of being prostituted in the United States, and 1/3 of the teens on the street will be lured toward prostitution within 48 hours of leaving their houses. So yeah. Child trafficking. The children are exploited in sweatshops, construction sites, and farms. They're also another way that they're trafficked is through sex, obviously. U.S. is one of the top destinations for child trafficking. Cases can be found in all 50 states and around the world as well. You see that it doesn't really matter what type of city it is. A lot of times you can't find children trafficking, and they are exploited sexually as well. In 2006 alone, there was 1 million children that were sexually trafficked. So one of the factors that make this so popular is the fact that it's easier to abduct kids because most of them are, when they're in poverty, they're alone, and their parents really aren't taking care of them, so they're more vulnerable. They promote younger slaves as well because male buyers demand them, and so it is easier to exploit them because they don't demand higher wages or better working conditions. So, yeah.
Just as an overview before of Fernando's portion, child and sex trafficking is very prevalent. It makes up the largest portion of human trafficking, and it is the one that is hardest to break free of typically, as they're just children. They have they don't know how to escape yet. I mean, they do, but they're not like strong enough, or they're not necessarily intelligent enough to break away from their captors. And work, the trafficked work, and the potential sex work that they have to do is a lot more breaking to their psyche and just physically. And so typically, even if they are rescued out of sex and child trafficking, it's very hard for them to get back into regular society. So on to Karim's portion of case study.
So I want to talk about a case study that happened actually in the United States, and I want to start off with saying that many people don't know that sex trafficking and trafficking, human trafficking in general, doesn't take place where, like near us. Like people don't know that it happens, but this case shows otherwise. And in Pittsburgh, there were young girls being bought and sold for sex, and the man called Mario Gruesome, with the age 34, he's being charged for running a sex trafficking ring, and Joseph Clément is also being charged for, like, he was a client to Mario, and he was having sex with minors. And how? They call it the modern day slavery as well. And the victims were working with 10 to 20 jobs a day, and this is minors, for $150 to $200 each person that sleeps with them, and all the money doesn't go to them; it goes to the pimps and the traffickers. And more than one anti-sex trafficking organization, which created a Western network in Western Pennsylvania. So these organizations are trying to help prevent sex trafficking around America and around the developed countries in the world. Next slide. And that's Joseph Clément. He was one of the clients, like I said, and this is them. Officials are addressing the topic. And I want to talk about my second case study, and where Germany and Netherlands. It was the SDU, SDP, and FDP. These are the legislative bodies that represent the German states. And what it was, what happened. The Dutch government are trying to tighten the laws of prostitution and like human trafficking and all these things. So they prevent human trafficking, so they can prevent human trafficking. Germany is also trying to follow the path of the Dutch and have a society without prostitution. However, Germany found that prostitution can be legalized. However, it cannot be forceful prostitution, and human trafficking is 100% legal in Germany. It's kind of obvious. But prostitution alone, like there are many women and men who are prostitutes that make money. They make money for a living, and they have to pay taxes and whatnot.
So we'll just a little bit more on this, as I read this article. They have to. So Germany legalized prostitution fully, but kind of even as Karim was saying, kind of the legality of prostitution is a little questionable, as they're fully against human trafficking, but it's hard with that because a lot of their prostitutes are actually human trafficked, but like prostitution in itself is legal, but they're getting their prostitutes from human trafficking means, and they're not getting paid decent wages. They don't have health care through their provider, and they still have to pay taxes through it all, which is kind of outrageous. as they don't get any benefits from the job. They don't have any job security. Only 1% of all prostitutes in Germany had a contract, had a legal contract, but still they have to go each morning and get a tax slip for what they do.
So like if Germany wants to legalize prostitution, they have to actually try to enforce the laws and try to actually give them a better pay and higher than minimum wage, so they can live a good life rather than like always being in this bubble of human trafficking, getting beaten up and getting a low pays.
In the article as well, they talked about a case in Sweden, how Sweden fully made prostitution illegal, and they were kind of charting how that worked. And Germany and like other EU countries were kind of baffled at that because they're like in favor of like prostitution and other things, you know, if they're done in a kind of if they're done kind of in a good manner. But like Germany again just has to focus on like the human trafficking issues, because most of the prostitutes are trafficked. 99% are trafficked from smaller countries, especially the new EU countries of Romania and Bulgaria, and they're taken from their families, kind of promise that, like as we saw in the video before, promise that they'll have a better job there, promise that they'll make good money, which they're not making in their hometowns. But then again, as Karim said before, and Fernando, the traffickers make most of the money, the brothels make most of the money, and a lot of that does not go to the actual prostitutes. And in the article, again, they were talking about how they would have deals, like all-for-one deals, like with a flat rate, and we didn't have to use a condom as well for it, which just encourages like sexual disease and stuff, which should not be legal again, and it just makes it so much worse. So they need to focus, we'll talk about that, the solutions, but they need to kind of deny human trafficking and make it a more regulated industry if they want to make it legal.
And here are some pictures of the actual brothels and places for prostitution in Germany or Netherlands.
Alright, so now we'll be talking about possible solutions. Global enforcement against trafficking, that is the obvious solution, but how it is actually enacted is a lot harder. But I suggest better cooperation between international, governmental, and nonprofit agencies. International agencies could be something like UNICEF, it could be something like the United Nations, who all have a role in preventing trafficking and preventing other things. Governmental agencies such as Homeland Security, and the United States in general, and like the Department of Immigration, other things all have a role in preventing trafficking. And then nonprofit agencies such as the Polaris Project, the Freedom Network, Not for Sale, and Free the Slaves, they all also have a role in preventing slavery, but they all work generally separately. If they were to compile their resources together, human trafficking, it would be a lot easier to get rid of human trafficking if they all worked in accordance with each other rather than separately on these issues. If the nonprofit agencies who are doing a lot of the work and stuff have the funding from the government, then human trafficking could potentially be a thing of the past. Also, you could go to this link later on if you want to see more organizations that talk about human trafficking. Also, greater funding is definitely an issue, especially with the nonprofit agencies who don't have a lot of money. Their resources are tightly kind of limited and restricted by by the funding they have. So greater funding to them could decrease human trafficking overall. Homeland Security and the UN don't need more funding, but they have a lot of other pressing issues on their hand. So if they were to make human trafficking one of their top issues, then human trafficking could also be a thing of the past. Also, greater awareness. Can I see a raise of hands of who knew how prevalent human trafficking was? Did you think that human trafficking happens in Boston? Did you know that human trafficking happens in Boston? So greater awareness could definitely be used could definitely decrease human trafficking. A lot of the runaways and stuff, a lot of human trafficking is caused by lack of awareness too. Lack of awareness for the actual help too, of the funding and of the actual problem on a large scale, but also on the small scale of who is being trafficked and your risk to be trafficked as well. The parents, when they're talking about, as we saw in the video, as the parents are talking about the better job opportunities, if these parents had the greater awareness of how prevalent human trafficking was, they might see the risks of taking a certain job that was kind of too good to be true. So I think greater awareness is definitely a big issue here that could be granted with greater funding from the nonprofit, international, and governmental agencies.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah.
I wanted to say, if we're trying to stop prostitution, because it's really hard, because half the world allows prostitution in their countries and the other half doesn't. So it's hard when the other half of the world allows prostitution and the other half doesn't. So it's hard to stop human trafficking, because prostitution leads to human trafficking and vice versa. So it's really hard for them to. It's hard to stop it.
Exactly. For those countries though that do still allow prostitution, they need to have better regulations, such as with Germany. They need to regulate the industry. They're trying to make it a taxable industry, which means in turn they need to regulate it. They need to put restrictions on it. They need to have the employers grant health care, which they definitely need in that industry. Make condom usage mandatory, as well as other things, higher wages, more percentage going to the actual people who do the work rather than the traffickers. These are all things that need to be done if prostitution is still to be encouraged, and background checks as well to make sure they're not being trafficked, honest interviews. I was reading that article as well. The traffic victims cannot go to the police because the police are often their customers. They have no out. They have nobody to turn to. The government needs to be more on their side if they're still to support prostitution.
And they also need to have disease checks, whether they have STDs or any of these kind of diseases, monthly. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. So then we're now on to our open discussion. Do we have any questions from the audience? Quick.
So like in states like Nevada where prostitution is legal, is human trafficking more or less prevalent?
Actually, human trafficking in Nevada is actually less prevalent because of the other certain factors. Human trafficking is usually a lot bigger on coasts, especially big cities, such as the San Francisco Bay, like Boston, New York City, a lot of and foreign cities kind of like Jakarta and other poorer cities. Nevada actually doesn't have a big human trafficking problem because a lot of the human trafficking problems you'll find within the United States will come from illegal brothels and stuff, while the United States has very heavy restrictions on prostitution, and it's very regulated, like the brothels in Nevada, that they're regulated so that they make sure that it's not human trafficking in there. While in Germany it's legal, but they don't have the heavy restrictions in there. The United States only has it legal in Nevada, but so that in turn they're a lot stricter on it. While most of the traffic victims go to non-legal places, like a lot of brothels are in California and parts of other cities. Kind of starting with their will, like it's not really against their will to begin with. I mean, it can be if the parents, if it's kind of taken from the parents, but typically it's in accordance with the parents or with the actual person's beliefs. Like if it's a runaway, and they'll think they're going to make a better life for themselves, but then the tables will turn and they will find themselves in slavery, like forced to work or do sex work for somebody else. Sex and child trafficking is a big part of human trafficking. It occurs with minors mostly, as in child trafficking directly refers to minors, but sex trafficking also happens a lot with people age 25 and under. A lot of them also minors sometimes. The case studies we talked about, we were talking about the case in Pittsburgh and the case in Germany. In Pittsburgh, it shows that human trafficking happens all across the United States. And then the case in Germany shows that even trafficked, 99% do not sign contracts to be prostitutes, which kind of leaves them at the whim of their employer. Their employer takes most of their money, which shows that this is not that this should not continue, that there should be restrictions involved, and that the prostitute should make more money if it's to continue being legal. And the solutions we talked about, greater funding for organizations, greater collaboration between the governmental, international, and nonprofit organizations, so that they can better kind of cast their net around human trafficking together, while just instead of casting smaller nets, if they cast one large one, they could better identify the problem. And also just greater awareness. We are all kind of better aware of human trafficking on the broad scale and on the small scale. The broad scale being like knowing kind of where it happens, like what percentage of people get trafficked, who's more likely to get trafficked, hotspots of trafficking, and also the lower kind of part of trafficking, like knowing not to like take jobs from people you don't know, like that ask you to move to like another part of the world that seem too whimsical to be true. Just things like that need to be done, I think, and they're not difficult to be done. I mean, for greater movement between organizations, that doesn't take any more money than it already does. It just requires greater collaboration between them, and I think that's a major component of getting rid of human trafficking. Greater funding, just some dollars can be, I mean, when there's like a world disaster, the Red Cross sets up donations for them, and then they have tons of money. Human trafficking is a world disaster, and if one of those like donation through like Red Cross is being done, that human trafficking could be ended with the money going to like the nonprofit organizations that can better help curb human trafficking. Then just greater awareness, like what we're doing now, kind of presenting to you on human trafficking, like what you can say to other people, or videos that can be shown to other people. Just anything to make people more aware of the situations that can happen kind of wherever you are, and what you can do to help those actual trafficked victims. I don't think we talked about this very much, but I want to add it in during the end. We've talked about it a lot, but the trafficked victims, if they are found, it's very hard for them to be brought back into society. There's like clinics and there's other nonprofits which work to aim that, like
people do
severe trauma, exactly, the sex workers. There's like organizations where I live where as it is like a hotspot for trafficking, there's ones that kind of help young women who were trafficked, like minors who were actually sex trafficked, help come back into society. But it's a very hard process for them. A lot of post-traumatic stress disorder is involved with human trafficking, especially sex trafficking. People were beaten, and just helping get these people who are already trafficked saved, rescued, and back to society is also a big part of it as well. So thank you for